You're listening to the Scaling Culture podcast, where we sit down with thought leaders who share their experiences building incredible workplace cultures. David Sturdee has been with Yum Brands for the past 13 years and is currently the COO and CCO for Pizza Hut. David has been at the forefront of driving a foundational approach to the brand engagement while deploying technology to change the customer experience. He's a firm believer in culture as the multiplier to strategy and technology deployment. Today, David talks about the influence of the pandemic on the restaurant industry and Yum Brands' experience going through a big culture change in the UK, as well as his journey with building an environment where franchisees would feel safe, aligned, and empowered.
Welcome to another episode of Scaling Culture Podcast. I'm Ron Lovett, your host, and I'm really excited to have David Sturdee with us today from the UK. David, welcome.
Ron, how are you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. I feel like I'm seeing you all the time now. We're building this bromance together.
Yeah, that's it. And I really, like I said, you're really enjoying your book, you know. Although, to be honest, I thought Jay-Z could have been a little bit more appreciative of you helping him out in a bit of a situation, right?
You know, that I always tell that story. That was a big kind of aha moment for me, that I was like, these celebrities don't care about me. I'm going right under that bus if anything happens, you know, for the most part. And so that was a big eye opener. It was a crazy story.
Indeed. Yeah, I have a great book, getting a lot from it. So.
Oh, great. I'm glad. So David is the COO at Pizza Hut Europe under the Yum Brands, and we're excited to have you here, David. Obviously, you're with a very large organization, and so I'm excited to kind of dive into different details about the company with you. And so let's go back, just for those who maybe don't know Yum, just talk about Yum for a second and what Yum is as a company and the brands that are underneath Yum.
Yeah, sure, Ron. So, so Yum Brands is the biggest restaurant business in the world. We got, we for a long time had three brands: KFC, Pizza Hut, and Taco Bell, and then recently acquired a US burger brand called the Habit Burger, which you may be aware of. So that's, I think, probably more West Coast in the US. But yeah, so we're obviously multinational throughout the world, and operate all the key brands within our different sectors. So I work exclusively on the Pizza Hut brand in UK and Europe.
And so were you nervous, and was the company nervous going into this pandemic? Because obviously restaurants have been one of the hardest hit sectors. I mean, that must have been pretty scary. Everybody had to buckle up. Yeah,
I think so. I think we realized quite quickly we had a role to play in that. A lot of our business is off premise, right? It's delivery. And we had quite a strong e-commerce platform to start with. So, as being as prepared as you can, I guess from a positioning point of view, we weren't in a bad position then. And we realized quickly we had a role to play in terms of helping people isolate and supporting the medical services and doing that during this time. But obviously, we do have quite a big restaurant division as well. And it is scary, right?
So I'm curious, as when I was thinking about your business, because is it corporate and franchisees or not? It's all delivered through franchisees.
Yeah, so the majority is franchise. I mean, we own some stores here in the UK, but predominantly we license out and we franchise. Yeah.
Got it. And is the corporate corporate side, are they responsible to tell the franchisees what they can or can't do? Or they have their own responsibility to find out in their jurisdictions how do they manage the pandemic and, distancing and masks and whatnot? Who's responsible for that in your business?
Yeah, so we worked with our franchisees on that. I mean, I think, and we'll talk a bit around how we were focusing on really improving that culture between ourselves and our franchisees. But I mean, this was a situation where we had to come together very quickly and figure out our way through this, right? Because we obviously had a lot of departments do government liaison, etc., and all that information. But our franchisees are there and they have to execute this. So together we needed to really figure it out, right?
So it's interesting, a major issue like this occurring can actually bring two sides together. It sounds like that's what you're saying. So it was like, holy cow, we better get together, get close, start to communicate so we can figure this out together. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's the only way you can effectively go through this. But I think the story for us starts even a little bit before that.
Yeah, bring us back pre-pandemic. What tell us about the culture, and then I know you guys have leaned into culture kind of during the pandemic. Walk us through.
Yeah, exactly. So I'd worked for Yum Brands for about 13 years now. Some of it out of the Middle East, some of it out of Asia, and then came back to Europe March last year, right, 2019, and took this role. And at this stage, the UK business specifically that we were referring to was quite challenged. I think from a metric point of view, it was usually towards the bottom, if not, maybe at the bottom in terms of, your guest experience, overall satisfaction, etc. So definitely a challenged business and a mandate to start, how do we change that? How do we fix it? And I think like all businesses went straight into the strategy, right? What is it? What's the tech we've got to deploy? What is the processes we've got to do? What's the structural change we need to make? And so that kind of, I think, ran its course last year. And about a year ago, actually December last year, we'd just done our planning for 2020, obviously having no idea what was really coming.
Yeah.
And I went away to Australia, and I was on holiday in Australia, and I just kept having this feeling that something was missing from our plans, right? And I'd go back and I'd think about our strategy, and I'd think about all of the the things that we're going to do and things we have planned and investments, and just something was always nagging at me. And then I think that aha moment came where it was all strategy and it was no culture, and there was huge gaps in our culture, and that was really the start of that journey. Was really that aha moment that this culture is either going to amplify and bring this alive, or we're dead in the water without it.
And when you say culture, are you talking kind of corporate culture or franchisee, the both? Where does it start and end with Yum?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yum has a strong corporate culture, right? I mean, I think it's one of the key tenets of our businesses that focus on culture and very principle driven. But the reality is we had gaps in our franchise relationship here in the UK. We were missing each other. The franchisee is dealing with the here and now on the day-to-day basis and highly practical. And, corporate, from a franchisor point of view, we're probably looking slightly ahead and we're thinking maybe a bit more strategically on the brand. And our paths had really started to deviate, and we were missing each other. And in time, I think this was eroding trust. There was a lot of internal energy that was being spent on probably not very positive things at times. And it wasn't great, and you could see that in the results, and you could see that in our ability to kind of react at the time.
So when I hear you say that, because this is very different than someone who's had this realization when they're starting their business plan in a small business. You guys are a monster at this stage. Where's the first step?
Yeah, where's the first step? Admitting you have a problem, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's good for you.
Yeah, and I mean, I say that half, flippantly, but I think it's also realizing there was an opportunity. And I was, very fortuitously, a book came into my life called The Culture Code. Who I think you're aware of this, right, Dan Coyle?
Love the book.
Yeah, really. And as I was starting to go to school in culture, this book, in fact, my boss gave this to me to read, which was just the perfect timing, right? And so quite soon it became that this was an opportunity, right? Like we had a great strategy. So we just kept looking back at it. It was the right one. But how are we going to bring this alive? And that, I guess that question, you want the world's best strategy or the world's best culture, right? And luckily you don't have to choose, but if you did have to choose one, I would choose culture every time, because you've got thousands and thousands of people trying to solve a problem versus a strategy that has the fingerprints of maybe 5-6 people on it, probably.
You're right.
So that really became exciting. Then it was like, because deep down, I just had this intrinsic, I just knew that strategy was going to move us forward, but it was not going to be transformational. And once we got that culture piece, once we started really walking in lockstep with our franchisees, we really started to make this a reality and bring that combined passion and direction into it. It was going to be a game changer.
And so what
happened?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's exactly how we've seen that play out this year.
And so what were some of those steps? I'm a franchisee, and so you've had this realization from the corporate side. Do you bring me in and survey, see if what you think is accurate? How do you go through that? What's it look like in execution?
So the first thing that I needed buy-in from the rest of my leadership team and from the people within our franchise organization, the franchisor, right? So I started a lot of water cooler conversations on flights back in the day when we used to fly, in airports, talking to people and really just talking to them about where I saw the gaps. And I knew we were onto a winner once I kind of I guess spoke about those three core tenets and the culture code. And the people I was speaking to would talk back to me about where they saw the gaps, right? Like it was so obvious, it was in that framework that they could see where those opportunities were. So the first phase was really that, I think, like getting a lot of getting people excited about this internally, right? And then we had a long conversations around how do we go and execute this.
Right, because that I mean, getting this step one is, well, I guess step one is realization. Step two is buy-in. Okay, fine. People believe that this is the right place to go, and now it's execution, right?
Exactly. So we, obviously my experience and history always comes from operations. So the first thing I wanted was a metric and to go and do a survey, but it felt like it would have been the wrong thing at that time because we'd have been reaching out and asking around. Like I think we were. It was an expectation that we knew that there was a problem already, right? So we decided to go straight into how do we now go and take some firm actions around some of these things. But we decided not to signpost this, right? I mean, you can imagine bringing all your franchisees together and have this PowerPoint presentation around, now we're going to fix our relationship and our culture and a marching band and all the rest of it. It's like, you can imagine the buy-in would be limited. So the thought was really, how do we just go and actually, how do we just do this? Let's prove it by doing it.
And so I just want to make sure timing wise, this happened before when you guys had this realization. This was pre-pandemic or during?
Yeah, so towards the end of last year, we had that realization. We already started to figure out what we wanted to do, and come January, we went straight into this, and it was, yeah.
And so how? Because when business starts to struggle or has external factors, whatever the case is, sometimes we throw that key strategy to the side. How did you guys say, you know what, we've said culture is important, we're going to lean in and continue to move forward? Because that must have came up as, whoa, we have bigger fish to fry right now.
Yeah, indeed it did in the beginning. I think, there definitely was concern around that. And we'll talk about some of the smaller groups that we started to organize our franchisees into, etc., which is obviously something that's worked, I think, very well for you as well, right? But we, I think once we had a couple of those going, it just became obvious that this was the winning solution to approaching this problem. That in fact it was the only way we we're going to navigate this was just being super close.
So let's go back. We're into execution. So you called a few franchisees and said, hey, let's have a discussion. Let's break that down a little bit.
Yeah, so we had all of our franchisees in a meeting in the beginning of January. We were kind of rehitting the strategy, and we threw the rule book out of the window for that meeting. And the kind of agenda that we would have run, we just completely changed it. We put it on its head. We put the franchisee at the beginning, and at the middle of that meeting, way more interactive, way more listening. Some download and giving them an opportunity to give meaningful feedback. And also having an opportunity to really start to have a say in where we wanted to go in a longer 3 to 5 years, as opposed to just, this is the strategy that we need you to execute over the next year. So I think that was the first thing, is we retooled our meetings, put our franchisees in the middle of them. But we also did some other things, right? So what are the 3 points of that culture code? The first one is around, creating safe, people feeling safe and a sense of belonging. Right? And the second is around being able to share vulnerability, right? Can you solve problems together? And then the third one is around how aligned are you on where you're going and the steps to get there. So the first one around, making people feel connected, we started to do, we obviously took this from the book, but we'd take small actions, like we would give our franchisees a jumper that was branded, that would have their name on it, right? So there was the brand and was personalized. And these little clues like that we were sending them, that you're an important part, you're connected to this brand, you're an important part of it, right? And we'd send them diaries that are, branded and customized, etc. So we were taking some big actions, and then we were also doing these like kind of small stylistic clues that really was indicating that they were a key and critical part of this business, right?
So interesting. So these strategies you implemented to start to build trust, so they would feel safe. And how did you do that in the conversations? Because I can imagine, this is, and I don't know, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but having this type of interaction with corporate might be more interaction than they've had before. Are you building new relationships? Were they surface level, or were they already deep and you, or not? You had to bring them deeper now.
I mean, I'm sure there was it's a scale, and there was some that were deeper than others, but on the whole, the trust probably wasn't where it needed to be. So I think there was a couple of things in terms of really moving that along. The first was around a mindset change, right? And that's that vulnerability piece, right? Like when there's no trust and there's a problem, it often the type of interaction can become quite abrasive, or it's the opposite of being vulnerable and saying, hey, I don't know the answer. How do we solve this together, right? And the first mindset change that I think I made, and it was a critical one that I needed to make, was to adjust my mindset to a default position that everybody was trying to do the right thing. So before, we'd had, some not great results the year before, and some of the conversations would have been, holding them accountable for some probably less than stellar, guest metrics, etc. that may have come through. But it just wasn't working. When it comes to the carrot or the stick, it's always going to be the carrot every time. That's really going to work. So I think changing my mindset to, okay, I trust and believe in the intentions of our franchisees and of those in our network that they do want to do the right thing. So if we're not getting there, then let's find out how to unlock that. And then the conversation changes.
I really like that, starting within and saying, look, I need to change my perspective to now trust that someone else's intentions are good versus not trusting that and having maybe a bit of a command control because I lacked trust before. That's great.
Yeah, indeed. And then it just changes the nature of every conversation. And that's that on that vulnerability piece. I think you have to lead with it, and you have to give people the space to reciprocate and to become a part of it, voluntarily, but through through I guess just a way more positive form of engagement,
And could you walk us through any specific challenges through that, and then how you got around those? Because someone had to push back, even when you change your perspective. There's me on the other side. Maybe I don't trust you still. And I always go back to Frances Frey, who we had on here, and she talks about this. If there's a misalignment of trust for some reason, it's usually one of three things. It's the authenticity, logic, or empathy. It sounds like you're starting to lean into compassion, empathy. I want to understand, that I'm empathetic to you. I think you have good intentions. What else do you think came up that maybe a brick wall that maybe you had to get around?
Yeah. So I think it's a good question. Ron, to be honest, I think we saw, we were on a journey and we still got some distance to go on this. There's no question about that. But I think the response was pretty positive from the beginning. Even after that first meeting when we had made a change, and a much needed change, we the sound bites that were coming back were already starting to be positive. And it was just a great, starting to, break that inertia, right? Get the ball rolling. I think one of the things that we did quite well is we have franchise consultancy boards, either on operational or IT or tech or marketing, matters, etc. And we really doubled down on the consultation that we did with them on pretty much any material decision we were going to make, right? And this then backed up that kind of empathetic part, and backed it up with that, the partnership part, and leading into the logic as well, right? Like side by side, figuring out the problems that we have. As a franchisor, I think it is our responsibility to do our homework and to go and have winning strategies. But putting these in front of franchisees and stress testing them and tweaking them and really taking on their feedback is really where they went from being fairly decent to being good to great, right?
And is it a mix? Do you have some franchisees that have 20 stores, some have 3? Is it a complete mix?
Yeah, from 1 to 30 probably would be the number that we have in the UK. Yeah.
And is the long-term vision that the franchisee can transcend some of these, this new culture, this new trust down to the store level?
Yeah, exactly. It's and when the light bulb moment went off, then you just want to do everything. Like, how do we get everybody involved, right? And I think, like our previous CEO used to say, you can do anything, you just can't do everything, right?
Yeah, great quote.
Really good, right? It's highly empowering, but highly focused. So we said, well, the franchisee is where we got to start on this, and we got some distance to go. We did some research recently, and we were seeing I think it was something like 76% of our franchisees felt more connected now than they did 12 months ago, which is, while managing a crisis and pandemic. And our guest scores, probably from a overall satisfaction point of view, are up about 22 points year on year.
Wow.
Not 22%, 22 points. Dissatisfaction down by about 18 points. Like it's this market that used to be, I guess, troubled at times, has now become one of the key markets globally that teams are looking to see, how to go and execute, how to manage the crisis, how to, move the business forward. And really this is on the back of that work that our franchisees are doing and that improved, partnership that we have.
So you're starting to see an ROI, and I noticed the stock really jumped back. I mean, took a dip as most did, but it really seems to be trending in the right direction. It's really bounced back for the most part, correct?
Yeah, sure. And obviously, I mean, we're a big business. It's 3 mega brands in 120
Right.
countries. So, there's how much is one country impacted is always a question. And I mean, some of the challenges we're dealing with culture now probably may not be as prevalent, and certainly isn't as prevalent in some of the other markets. But we are seeing internally, we're seeing from our results from every angle that this is really starting to pay off. And it's, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's incredible. I think, it's very interesting to see an organization in a challenging space. And I'm going to say a tough business, because there can be a major disconnect between franchisor, franchisee, licensor, licensee. And so really this pulling them closer, getting them more involved in the business, getting them at the table. It sounds like now having a stake in the business, a voice at the table. These are great strategies, and it sounds like it's paying off.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you had asked me a year ago how far, how much progress could we make? How could we really improve? How much could we improve this business in 12 months? Realistically, I would have, probably thought half of what we had done would have been a tremendous result. I mean, it's like, it's mind blowing what we are seeing and how that's really starting to come through. And I think there's 2 areas that have really played a role in this. The first is, we used to always have these conversations around metrics. Your overall satisfaction was this, or your bottom 2 bucks of dissatisfaction was this. And then it just took on a life on its own, and it was a point of conflict, etc. And so at that first meeting, we took a step back and we said, forget the metric. What are we trying to achieve here? What do we want, right? And we did an exercise with them, 3 to 5 years from now. What do we want in this business from a franchisee point of view, from a team member or associate point of view, and from a customer point of view? And we spent a whole lot of time that really going, future back, what is this going to look like?
And what were some of the key things that came out of that?
So some of them, I think you would anticipate. There was obviously, expectations of improved profitability, which is right. I mean, that's the kernel for growth in our business. But interestingly enough, I think a lot of them were aligned with. They were not completely disaligned from what we would have thought as a franchisor, in terms of where they wanted to position this business from a customer point of view. But I think it was having that conversation and as you say, giving them a seat at the table and really getting good feedback from them that allowed us to get to a position where we weren't just talking about a metric. Now we were talking about a purpose, right? There was something bigger than just a metric that we were talking about, and then we aligned on the metrics to get there. But it was almost like that conversation hadn't happened before. So when you jump straight into the metric, there's no emotional connection to it, and it's just a less than effective way of managing the business.
Interesting. And so what's the next level of that? You guys have taken culture into your strategic planning, walk before you run. You've obviously achieved more than maybe the plan had showed. What's next? What's the next hurdle to get through?
So
get over.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things that obviously worked quite well for us was we intrinsically knew that we had this feeling that our franchisees were not feeling connected. Part of this was driven by the geography of the country. Part of this was driven by, a lot of them would work within their own businesses and they'd have, limited access to other franchisees. So we made the call to organize them into these smaller groups, right? And then these smaller groups would have representation from the senior leadership from the franchisor side. And they would meet at least once a month and have those, have an hour together with an agenda, really the opportunity to celebrate what was going on, to understand what the needs were, share best practice, etc. this really, I think, has started to pay dividends, and it really helps with a sense of connection, because at the number of franchisees that we had, the group dynamics is probably not one that leads itself to very close connection, right? Once you start going to smaller groups, they become more meaningful, and the conversations become deeper, right? So that's worked for us. I think we have the opportunity to do more there, and we're working with your team on this now to see how do we actually get outside support on this to run these meetings and to really make sure we can get the most value from it, and then how do we cascade that then to beyond franchisee.
Right. Yeah. I love that. I mean, obviously and I think there's other aspects that at first glance may not be, may not show up, i.e. even having individuals in that type of format. It also helps with diversity, because everyone has the same voice. We all have different backgrounds. And so all of a sudden we're sharing our own experience. There's a ton of value there. I love, of course, I love that strategy. But diversity inclusion is this is a great way to all of a sudden lean into something like that. Because I think most are having a hard time even figuring that out. How do you get diverse voice? How do you transfer information throughout an organization, right? How do you, someone does something really well, I think we always think to technology and think, oh, if David's really good at this, we store it somewhere, and someone had in some internal messaging board can Google it and find it, and no, have a conversation with David and ask him the question and let him share his experience, his stories. And of course, typically experience are shared through stories, and we remember stories, right? Versus being talked at. So I love it. And so you're saying, look, we're going to bring it closer. Once we get this right, then we're going to move deeper into the business, the franchisee's business. Is that the plan?
Yeah, I think so. I think we still have some work to do with our initial focus, and we've just done some research with our franchisees now, and got some more insights as to how we need to continue this journey. But yeah, I think as that starts to continue to get good traction, the obvious step is to really broaden this. How do we take that next level of all of the above store leaders, and then from there the restaurant managers, right? How do we start to build these similar type of smaller groups that really have that meaningful impact, and being able to share that information, connection, celebrate stuff, really bring alive all that stuff that we want to see there, right?
And in these groups, were they originally shy to share challenges? Like, look, I don't want to share that I've got this challenge, or I don't want to celebrate I'm doing so well because I've got other franchisees. How did you get through that?
I think to the credit of our franchisees, certainly the ones that I've attended, they've embraced them. I think I think they get better as they go on, and as people, the relationships build, and as hopefully as the trust builds as well. I mean, there's some things that definitely destroy value in these. So if we came in there with a franchisor mindset and used it as a mini regional meeting, it's going to destroy value, right? Like,
right.
We were behind in our listening anyway. So this was an opportunity for us to truly understand what our franchisees were going through, and to really, peel away those layers and understand the day-to-day relationship, day-to-day challenges, what they were, what their concerns were, what were they dealing with. So I think a lot of it helped in that we came in there as active listeners, as opposed to trying to, just have this as a small regional meeting.
And what's one thing, because I'm sure there was a few things that popped up, but as corporate sat in on these meetings and got to and started really listening. And I love that you said, hey, we were behind on listening, and good for you as an organization to say, hey, we need to lean into this. What's something that you didn't know what you didn't know, i.e., wow, we're hearing this, and so we need to bring this back and help strategize around that issue? Was there anything that popped up that you didn't anticipate, you didn't know?
Good question. I think there was so many smaller things that were making life difficult to the franchisees that we weren't aware of. So you roll all of that up, and it was a big insight. An example could be the way that the VAT invoice was coming through. If you're a multi-store owner, the consolidation, time on those reports was just astronomical on one of the channels of our business. So just getting an idea and some insight into that, and to being able to go and fix it, I think was was probably where a lot of that value was, you know.
And did they have to do anything up front? Because I'm just trying to visualize this. So I'm on corporate, or I'm a franchisee and you're corporate, and I'm going to talk about this VAT issue. Do I have enough of a relationship there? It sounds like you worked hard at the beginning. Was there anything done in the group level? So for instance, when we run our pods, there's a deep dive to really build that trust and vulnerability. You know, it sounds like you had done a good job, because for me to be comfortable enough to tell you this is a challenge I'm having, you're on the other side of it. And so I trust that you're going to take the information, maybe help me with it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we were building this plane as we were flying it, right? So
Right.
you know, once the like kind of that light bulb moment happened, I wanted to get this going and live and not wait on it, right? Because you could take 6 months to plan this, and then what happens then, or we could just get into it and start figuring it out. So
I
that's
love
why I
that.
think,
And
yeah, but
and David, let me say kudos to a large organization to do that, because most large organizations say, "Oh my goodness, we need to overplan this, make sure it's perfect, and then execute." But you don't know what you don't know. Versus,
yeah,
let's just look. We get the concept. We have a great intention here. Let's move through. We're going to learn through the process. So I love that. Good for you guys.
yeah, because executed is always better than perfect, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's like that's you could have all of these fantastic plans, but if you're not actually moving them along, then but what it does mean is, and I think that's why we're engaging with some of your team now, is okay, we think we've done a decent job in this and we think it's starting to have some value, but how can we really take it to its next level, which is I think why we're very interested in seeing where that goes, you know.
So if you were going to advise another major corporation that had franchisees and had a franchisor that was going to head down this path, let's go back. What is a couple of the key things that she or he has to keep in mind?
Mm. So yeah, I wonder. I think the first one is that we go back to the question: what do you want? The world's best strategy or the world's best culture, right?
Right.
Now, every time I've had that conversation, I don't think anybody has ever chosen strategy. I think they've all chosen culture. But how much time is spent talking about strategy versus talking about culture? If it's 95-5, I'd be surprised on the strategy side, right?
Right. So the number one thing you're saying is, if you're doing your planning, your strategic planning, corporate planning, whatever that is, implement culture into that. If it's missing, that was back to your story, that was the one thing that it was just tugging at you. You knew something was missing. And so it sounds like that's the number one thing. Ensure that culture is a part of that somewhere, somehow.
Yeah, make it the main thing, right?
Okay, got it. And actually, you have it at the forefront. You're saying this should be
Yeah,
top of mind, top of strategy. Got it.
exactly.
And what else? What's a few other key things that you try to, if you're advising someone who's going to go down this path, who, I'm sure other franchise corporations that have franchisees, this has to be a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, in business it is, right? Because a franchise network is just a larger team with a slightly different dynamic, but ultimately it's the same team, right? We're all
Right.
in the same brand, driving the same thing. So the franchise environment adds its own uniqueness to it, but a lot of the core principles are probably not dissimilar. I think the learning also for me was, when you talk about culture before, there's a chance that this may be perceived as somewhere between, like it's a gray area. It's not very tangible. Maybe it's personality driven. Like, how do you actually go after it? It's like you just need a strong leader. But the reality is, like anything else, it needs framework and it needs structure and it needs execution, right? And that there's concrete steps that can be taken to drive culture. It's not this kind of esoteric thing that's hanging around somewhere in the ether, right? It's actually an executable strategy.
It's interesting. I think about my aha moment in culture, because I used to think the same thing. This is like rainbows and unicorns.
Yeah.
I can't grab a hold of this. But the book for me, and I'm not sure if you read it, was Nuts, about
Okay.
Southwest Airlines.
Yeah.
Have you read that book?
No, I haven't. I know of it, but I haven't read it.
Incredible book. It just, it's one of those books that you're reading kind of Herb Keller's stories about
Mm.
the culture. You don't even believe it. You're like, come on, really? It was that was my aha moment to say, wow, I've got work to do. I originally had, a decent culture that wasn't identified. We hadn't really built the framework of what our core values were to drive culture. But within arm's distance, I thought I had decent culture. But of course, as I built my previous company, we had offices across the country. And every time I walked into that office, it felt like a different business. So is that the case today, or it sounds like you're trying to move in a new direction, but there must be this different culture at the franchisee level, because, if I'm a franchisee and I've got 10 stores and this is how I want the business to operate or not, are you finding, it sounds like you've got some good metrics, some good results coming out, but are you finding that you're getting some continuity within the culture?
Yeah, definitely. I think the discipline around having those smaller connected, those partnership meetings that we have is critical. And the business is showing good discipline that the leaders don't miss those. Those need to happen. They do happen. I think the new approach that we have to the way we run meetings, and that we have a ratio now around how much is download, how much is feedback, how much is understanding. What's
the ratio?
Well, roughly, we don't like to go above a third on any of them, right? Because we think if we as a franchise, it's our responsibility to come with solutions, to come with a deep understanding of the business and where to take the brand. So we can't neglect that responsibility, but at the same time, we can't overstate that and not have it flexible enough for our franchisees to weigh in and to give feedback. And it's our continued responsibility to make sure that we continue to understand what they're going through. So we don't like to go above a third on any of those. Now, having this repeatable model in place means that if I go and leave, or Steve Cho, who runs our UK franchise, if he goes on leave, does culture fall down? Well, it shouldn't, right? Because now we've got a framework, we got and an understanding, right? And then the mindset is just constantly on the mindset, the belief in all people, the belief that people want to do the right things. It opens up the relationship to so much more after that.
That's great. Look, in closing, Dave, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you think would be helpful? Anything that we didn't discuss?
I mean, it's a culture. We could be discussing this for a week and we'd still have room to go, probably.
Yes.
No, I don't know. Something that I actually found quite interesting the other day is I was. Have you watched Below Deck? Have you heard of this?
No. What is it?
So this is a show where they do it's these big yacht charters, 180 feet, and they have this crew that work on it. So it's reality TV. I watched 2 or 3 episodes of this, and they have these. So like these charters probably cost $300,000 US a week or whatever. It's huge. And if you watch it, it is the perfect example on how to not drive, how to build the worst type of culture. You've got these captains of these boats that are just so set in their ways and hierarchical, and you've got these team leaders who don't know how to talk to their teams and who don't spend any time in making people feel connected or safe. It's highly recommendable. Like sometimes to understand how important culture is to actually see how bad it is when it's run incorrectly. I thought it was a very fascinating example of intrinsically doing every wrong thing when it comes to culture. And when you're on a yacht, even 187 or 190 foot yacht, there's no running away, right? So that pressure cooker so I thought that was fascinating, a great case study in what not to do. So
that's interesting. I'll check that out. I know the last book that I read that was, I don't know if you heard the Theranos about the blood, the company about the blood.
Yes.
And I think the book's called Bad Blood. It sounds very similar to that. They had I actually talked about that book in our new book, Scaling Culture. It sounds exactly like that show you're describing. It was command control, secretive, no trust. Everyone's on eggshells all the time, doesn't know what they can or can't do. If anybody stepped out of line, the lawyers are stepping in. It was just unbelievable.
Absolute value destroyers, right?
That's it. Yeah. Well, David, look, thanks for coming on today. I appreciate your time and your feedback. This is great. It's great to see you, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Ron.
For more information on David or anything else related to Scaling Culture, please see the show description for details. If you're enjoying the Scaling Culture podcast, please subscribe. We'll be back next week with another incredible guest.